Okay, good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming along to the TDAG seminar today. This is the first TDAG seminar of 2026, but the last in our seminar on resilience. And the theme today is tree success stories. So I think that's a great way to start off the new year. A little bit about TDAG. We are a network and a forum that brings people together to support the role of urban trees through better collaboration in the planning, design, construction, maintenance, and management of our urban places. Evidence-based information is really important to us. So practice, best practice, presentations, your knowledge, all this knowledge exchange and cross-sector working is what we enjoy and what we like to have to try and grow the biggest trees in our urban areas. We would like to thank the partners for this particular event. So that's the Landscape Institute, the Town and Country Planning Association, and the Urban Design Group. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our chair for today. So Tony Kirkham, MBE, former head of Arboretum Gardens and Horticultural Services from the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, where he worked for more than 40 years. And now Tony is Vice President of the AA and a TDAG Patron and General All-Time Tree Great of the World. Over to you, Tony.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you for TDAG for putting this presentation, this webinar on today. I think it's a great title and a wonderful opportunity to look at some success stories. I was at Kew for 43 years, and one of the best things of my job was tree planting. I loved it, and I still do that today. I'm involved in various projects around the country, buying trees and getting them planted, getting them in the ground. But one of the things I'm concerned about, we talk a lot about tree planting, and we hear a lot of negative stories about success rates and how tree planting projects fail and go into decline. And one of the things I'd like to do is to sort of get rid of that term tree planting and for us to stop talking about tree planting and to talk about tree establishment. And I think, if we talk about tree establishment, we're looking at targets, then we should be measuring targets based on what's been successful 3 or 5 years down the line. Are those trees that we planted today still alive in 3 or 5 years and onward? And tree planting is a part of tree establishment. So, as I say, we hear lots of negative things about tree planting targets and projects, and there is widespread concern that many tree planting projects don't have the rate of success that they should. So today we want to highlight through a series of case studies and project examples what success looks like and how it can be achieved. So we have 4 great speakers lined up today. Our first speaker is Jane Findlay, founder of Fira and past president of the Landscape Institute, who's going to talk about projects that have stood the test of time. Jane, over to you.
Thank you, Tony, and good afternoon, everybody. I'll just try and share my screen. So if you hang around, Tony, make sure you can see it before you disappear off. Can you see that?
I've got a blank screen at present. Oh no, there it is. Derwentthorpe, York. Is that the one?
Yes, that's the one. Yeah, I think that's my project anyway. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Great stuff. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. As Tony said, I'm Jane. I'm also the past president of the Landscape Institute, and I'm a trustee of the Earth Trust, which is a land-based charity in Oxfordshire. And I'm also a landscape advisor to both the University of Warwick and the National Memorial Arboretum. So my life has always been around trees and tree planting. And as Tony said, I don't know what I'm so addicted to tree planting that I think I'm going to find it very hard to take a step back and retire. But my work over the last few decades has been focused very much on healthcare, public realm, housing, and green infrastructure, with a really strong emphasis on health and well-being. And that thread runs directly through the Derwentthorpe project that I'm going to talk to you about today. So Derwentthorpe Garden Village as we like to call it, is a mixed tenure development on the north edge of York. And I worked on this project with Studio Partington Architects and Allen Wood and Partners engineers for the Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust. And their ambition was to create a community that's both socially and environmentally sustainable. So from the outset, the landscape, and particularly the trees, were seen as fundamental to shaping the character of the place and supporting that long-term health and well-being. But to understand why Durdant-Thorpe was conceived in this way, it's important to understand the value and legacy of the client. Durdant-Thorpe sits very deliberately within a sort of lineage of thinking. Over a century ago, Joseph Rowntree's work at New Earswick recognised that access to landscape and nature and a strong sense of community are fundamental to health and well-being of a population. And our task here wasn't to recreate a historic garden village, but to reinterpret those principles for the 21st century, using landscape and green infrastructure as the organising framework for the development. And on this project, continuity has been crucial to the success of it, because Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust has retained the long-term stewardship of the project, and the original design intent really hasn't been diluted over that time. So it's allowed the landscape to be developed, to mature, adapt, and to flourish. These values set a clear direction, but translating them into a real place meant responding to the practical realities of both scale, land use, and of course, local concerns. Durdant-Thorpe was delivered in 4 phases, and they're still finally building out the 4th and final phase, and it comprises of around 500 new homes of mixed tenure. So it's not a huge project, but it was in a very sensitive area. But now most of the phases are complete. It allows us to reflect on how the landscape has performed over time. The master plan is underpinned by the garden village principles that were established at New Earswick. And of course, there was that clear brief to create a socially and environmentally sustainable community. The site is the landscape, the green infrastructure is roughly 35% of the site, so it's quite a high proportion of site. It's all managed open land, including a village green, play spaces, ponds, swales, all of which form part of the everyday landscape for the residents. And the site sits within a very flood-prone area, which you can imagine what it will be like at the moment. It's probably very soggy around there. And of course, this was the greatest concern raised by local residents during the pre-app consultation. So addressing the flood risk was therefore fundamental to the master plan and directly shaped how the landscape and open spaces were designed. And those concerns became very real when we started to understand the site itself and the conditions we were working with. It's on the edge of the small village area of York called Osbaldwick. And before the development, it was largely rough pasture with overgrown hedges. It was used mostly as informal dog walking area, but it lacked structure, management, and a clear role within that wider landscape context. And physically, it was a very challenging site. As I say, it was highly waterlogged with high water table and vulnerable to flooding with the beck that flows through it. But at the same time, it's an important area of open land right at the city's edge, made understanding and responding to these conditions particularly crucial. So rather than seeing those conditions as constraints to overcome, they became the starting point for the design. Sustainability underpinned all our design decisions at Durdant-Thorpe, but it was the landscape principles that guided the master plan. And we worked very closely with the ecological consultants to develop a connected green and blue network to support biodiversity and to integrate the new neighbourhood with the village of Osbaldwick. We worked with all the existing landscape and ecological features, so the hedgerows, grasslands, trees and watercourses. And that included things like carefully laying the hedges and even translocating hedgerows rather than starting from scratch. Key design decision was to work with the site's natural character and conditions rather than trying to engineer them away. And the landscape, and particularly the tree structure, was used to shape the layout, the streets and the open spaces. And because we had an enlightened client, we were able to establish the green infrastructure early before the homes were built. And by allowing space for water, soils, roots from the outset were set up to react to the conditions so the trees could establish properly and mature over time. So how that design and intent was translated onto the ground during construction. As you can see here, we were fortunate to be able to deliver the blue and green infrastructure before the homes started, which was critical in establishing that sense of place from the outset. And we found that this approach had very clear advantages. It allowed careful handling and reuse of the site soils. We had early procurement of plant materials, so the trees were grown specifically for this project and reserved 2 years before they were required. And it gave us a greater control over the selection of landscape contractors and nurseries. Of course, there were challenges. The soil had a very high clay content, and 2011, which was our main construction year for the first phase of the project and the green infrastructure, it was a particularly wet winter, not dissimilar to what we're experiencing at the moment. And avoiding compaction required constant attention on site. But we had strong collaboration right across the team, which made a real difference, and a really good contractor who was well organised was invaluable. So overall, it was a genuine team effort with very few plant failures, and that early investment has paid dividends over time. And those early decisions around soil, sequencing and procurement shaped the planting strategy. As we all know, planting is absolutely crucial to the long-term success of the project, but it's often one of the last things to be properly considered. But at Derwentthorpe, we developed a detailed planting strategy right at the master planning stage, which was then carried through consistently right across all the phases. And although we weren't involved in phase 4, the same planting strategy was used all the way through. We adopted a tiered approach with more ornamental planting close to the homes, gradually blending into native planting within the wider green spaces using the structure of the existing hedgerows and trees. And the selection was driven by long-term performance. We were looking for year-round interest, we wanted to support wildlife, and we were being realistic about maintenance and management. The structural woodland planting was based on wet woodland communities, complemented by feature trees, and they were some of those were semi-matures because we wanted to provide some feeling of early maturity and identity. But we had meadows, bulbs, wetland planting. It was the full palette of material. But crucially, all of this was underpinned by a 20-year management plan, with Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust retaining the responsibility for the long-term stewardship, because even the best planting will fail without the right care over time. But what really matters, of course, is how that planting has performed over time. Within the first few years, the structure and function of the landscape were beginning to emerge. In the first year or so, which is this photograph, was taken about 18 months after we finished planting, you can see the landscape already looks cared for and coherent, but still very immature. And this is where patience really matters. We all know it takes a long time for things to become properly established. But at this point, it was the retained hedgerows and existing trees that provided the structure and scale, whilst the newly planted trees were establishing. The wetland areas, you can see here, responded very quickly and were already thriving early on. This is the winter view from around about 4 years in. Even at this stage, the structure of the landscape is beginning to read clearly, with strong tree growth and a real sense of enclosure starting to form. think what's particularly noticeable is how well the water bodies are functioning with an abundance of wildfowl using the site. And it's an early indication that the green infrastructure is beginning to operate as a living system, not just as a designed composition. Now, 15 years on, the landscape now feels settled, almost as though it's always been here. And in fact, it looks as though it's been there longer than the buildings itself. The hedgerows and the trees are maturing nicely. The wetlands, as you can see, are functioning as intended, and the whole place reads as one coherent living landscape rather than a newly created one. That maturity is reflected not just in how the place looks, but how it functions ecologically. The native planting is supporting a wide range of species, with birds, pollinators, and fish now established as part of the site's everyday life. They have bird watching clubs, and they're putting up bird boxes and bat boxes everywhere. So the residents are really getting involved in the site itself. And this level of biodiversity isn't the result of intensive management, but creating the right conditions and allowing the landscape to mature over time. The green infrastructure at Derwentthorpe plays a critical role in stitching the development into the surrounding landscape. The swales and the retained hedgerows help integrate the housing layout, softening the edges and creating very clear relationships between the built form and open space. But they also allow the development to be delivered in phases while still feeling coherent and mature from the outset. So the residents are not disturbed by the building that might be going on site at the same time. But it reinforces that sense that landscape was there first and the housing followed. And as the landscape has matured, it's not just the structure that's become established, it's the very nature here that supports human health and well-being, and how people experience and use the place. 15 years on, the landscape supports a healthy and active community. People walk, run, cycle through the neighbourhood. They can cycle right into York and back out on the Sustrans route, and the children play outside as part of everyday life. In fact, they even build dams in the swales, which is not too helpful when it comes to flooding. But independent evaluations report around 90% resident satisfaction with the green spaces and the landscape quality consistently identified as key factors. So looking back across the project, there are some very clear lessons about what made this long-term success possible. And they're quite simple, actually, but require a certain amount of commitment. I think clear and meaningful design principles are important, with a willingness to work with the site conditions and care taken with the soils and the specification, including the underground infrastructure to support the establishment of trees, all matter enormously. Just as importantly, the long-term stewardship has allowed the landscape to mature, adapt, and improve over time. And finally, evidence matters. It isn't just enough to say landscapes will deliver biodiversity, health, or long-term value. We need to be able to demonstrate it. And at Derwentthorpe, independent evaluation, resident feedback show just how the landscape has actually performed 15 years on. And that evidence gives confidence, not just in the project, but in the principles behind it. So thank you very much for listening. That was a whirlwind visit to Derwentthorpe. And with that, I'll hand back to Tony.
Thank you, Jane. A really great project to see. And I think what stood out to me from your presentation is the quality of the nursery stock that you were planting, and how you procured it 2 years in advance, had it grown on in the nurseries, and then brought onto site. And looking at those photographs 14 years on, those trees look like they've established, like they've been there forever, rather than stressing and going into decline. So, you know, that what a great project, and so rewarding, actually, and encouraging to see success like that. I'm just going to ask one. There are a couple of questions, a few questions coming in. One in particular from Meg Hannah. A question for Jane. Beautifully designed site. Do you have any information on the quantity or percentage of existing trees retained through the project, and potential for increased canopy with new trees that have been established? In other words, trees and canopy now versus pre-construction.
Well, I haven't got any precise figures, but I can honestly say that we tried to build all the houses in the rough pasture areas. So we took out very little vegetation in the first instance, but we put in an awful lot more. So I think the canopy cover has increased with the design of this project, which sounds counterintuitive. But I think that is the case, and it's something we've done on a number of our projects, and particularly on low-performing greenfield sites, which are rough pasture with very poor grasses and that sort of thing, where the ecological value of that pasture land is quite low. We've actually increased. One project I worked on, we increased the biodiversity by 160%, even though we built on more than half of it. So it's not difficult to do, to be honest with you. It just needs that careful consideration and willingness of all the parties involved in the master planning to get behind, going for a highly treed site and great green infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you. I love the way that you've integrated natives and non-natives as well, or ornamentals and natives.
Yeah.
So, giving residents that seasonal interest, ornamental interest, and then phasing out into the woodland and the grassland areas with natives.
Do you know, Tony, for me, that's really important, because whilst I love native woodlands and I have my own woodlands and so on, but I love ornamental trees as well. And I think it's so important to bring colour and structure in. So it's almost like an arboretum effect. So you have your woodland backdrop, and you have some principal beautiful trees that people can use as landmarks. And we use those as focal points at the ends of roads and in housing, different parts of the housing areas, to create particular themes around neighbourhoods. Obviously, there's so much detail, I can't go into it all, but I think it's really important to have both.
Yeah, I agree. And of course, more diversity is a better resilience, and improved resilience for climate change and the introduction of exotic pests and disease as well. So fantastic.
Completely with you on that. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you, Jane. I'm sure we'll come back. I'll see what we have time-wise left at the end. There are questions coming in now, so you've really generated some interest. So thank you very much, and congratulations to Derwentthorpe Garden Village. Okay, well, that's a great start from Jane. So thank you, Jane. And I'd like to introduce our second speaker, Rachel Bryan, a Green and Healthy City Project Officer for the City of Portsmouth. And Rachel's going to talk about the importance of social and cultural values for resilient treescapes. Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Hi, Rachel, you suddenly muted.
Did you get my last bit, Sue?
Sorry.
Yeah, okay.
Am I back now? Fabulous. Right, let me just share my screen. Fabulous. Let me go to the start of my presentation. Okay, so thank you for inviting me to speak today. As per Tony's introduction, my name's Rachel and I work for Portsmouth City Council. So my role is really focusing on climate resilience across the city, and making the city adaptable to our future climate. So nature-based solutions are a real key asset, a real key tool that we have at our disposal to help with the cooling, with the air quality, with flood alleviation across the city. So I really focus on our resilient treescape and also sustainable urban drainage projects as well. So we know in Portsmouth,
we need more trees. We have very low tree canopy cover. So our iTree Eco Survey in 2024 showed that we have 8.9% tree canopy cover. And that's not evenly distributed across the city. We have some wards, some neighbourhoods, which is only around 3% tree canopy cover, whereas other wards have about 14%. So we really, really need to focus on trees and tree establishment, and also maintaining and maximising the benefits we're receiving from our existing treescape. So as part of our iTree Eco Survey in 2024, where we worked with Forest Research, we also were able to do a social and cultural values survey that ran alongside and contributed to that iTree Eco Survey. So the purpose of the social and cultural value survey was to gain a greater understanding of the importance of Portsmouth's trees to local people. So we wanted to really kind of get the voices of people who live, work or study in Portsmouth. And we were gathering their views around how they perceive trees. You know, do they think the trees are of benefit to the city, or are they a bit of a nuisance? Their preferences for different trees. So do they really want to stick with native trees, or are they open to considering non-natives or near natives? And there was questions asking around kind of how they feel trees should be managed, and why they're valuable and why they're important. So we gathered all this information through an online survey. The survey was open for roughly 6 weeks over August and September in 2024. We promoted it through lots of newsletters, council website, social media. Our library colleagues were running events in parks, so they took out promotional material for the surveys as well. So we really tried to kind of reach a real cross-sector of everyone in Portsmouth. And we gained just over 1,000 responses, which for a council promoted survey was really high and really valuable. So I've pulled out a few of the key findings from that survey. So one of the questions was around visibility, and asking how many trees people could see from their home, their place of work or their place of study. And as we can see on the graph, the Portsmouth was split up into 4 different areas for the purpose of this survey. And we can see that the majority, quite a large proportion, people could see 3 or more trees. But we can see some areas, such as the southwest of the island, where that's not quite as high. You know, people could only see 1 tree or maybe 2 trees from where they lived or worked. So how are we kind of using this data to inform our work? So we're currently, we're going to get the 330-300 data for Portsmouth. So we can really then start looking at a real granular level and understanding if there are particular areas of the city, or even right down to building level, if certain places can't see 3 trees from their site. And we're going to kind of take an approach of looking at certain types of buildings. So we might go through schools first and see if all our schools can see 3 trees from their site. And that can help inform our future planting. We're also working with lots of external landowners and large employers across the city. So we have people such as university, MOD and NHS being some really kind of large key landowners. So again, we can use this data to kind of help inform discussions with them and help them kind of get on board with what we're trying to achieve for our resilient treescape. People were asked around their views on management of trees for environmental quality and what their top answers were for different environmental qualities. So people thought it was really important to manage trees for improving our air quality, and also for wildlife and habitat, and also for absorbing CO2 from the atmosphere. So those were the top sort of 3 ways that people wanted to see trees being managed. So that data, we're really kind of focusing our current and future planting around planting for benefits. So rather than just planting by numbers, where you're just trying to achieve a certain target, we're really looking at different neighbourhoods or different wards within the city, using this data from social and cultural values, and also using things like tree equity to really kind of design planting schemes that will bring benefits. So we know there's lots of areas in the city which have urban heat island effect and suffer from excess heat. So we're using that information to plant so we get those cooling benefits. All the data from this social and cultural value survey and our wider iTree Eco survey has been used to create our urban forest master plan for the city. So again, that's quite a new document for us. We only kind of finished it last year, but again, it sets out our vision for the city, for our resilient treescape, with lots of actions and deliverable targets within that. We will be creating a new green infrastructure strategy later this year and into next year. And again, all of this information will feed into those strategies. And green infrastructure has been recognised in our draft clean air strategy as a real key tool for contributing to that clean air that we're trying to achieve. Oh, I'm just struggling to move my slides on. Bear with me, please.
Will they go backwards, Rachel, and then forwards? Okay.
Right, yeah, it's gone backwards, isn't it?
It's not moved.
Oh, it went backwards for me.
Okay.
No, so if I stop sharing for a minute and then I'll just try and start again.
Good.
Okay, so residents' gardens have been identified as a real opportunity area across the city for increasing greening and increasing biodiversity. They make up quite a high proportion of land use within the city. A typical Portsmouth garden is quite small, and the majority of our houses are terraced houses. So individual gardens are quite small, but when you add all of those gardens together, it really kind of adds up to a quite a large area. So residents were asked if they would be willing to consider planting a tree in their garden. 39% of the respondents said they would consider planting a tree. So we have recently just run a offer for residents of Portsmouth, and it's tied in with our centenary celebrations this year for 2026. So we worked with local tree nursery Hilliers, and we came up with a list of 7 species which we thought were suitable for the typical Portsmouth garden. So kind of smallish, medium-sized trees, or tree such as crabapple, and we had some flowering cherries. But also we chose trees that were different cultivars. So we had the Acer campestri streetwise, which is a really kind of more upright version of field maple. So again, not too kind of large for a typical garden. So we had that offer live in December and into January. And then last week we had the trees that were bought, were delivered. And on Saturday, the residents came and collected them. We had, it's the first time we've ever run this. We had 5 trees that were purchased through this offer. So I think that's a real success. People were really interested, really keen, and hopefully we've given them some advice and guidance on how to plant and care for their trees as well. So it's something we may look to repeat, possibly at the end of this year as well. So it still ties in with that residents' that centenary celebration. People's views on engagement with trees and if they would be willing to engage with trees were also important throughout the survey. So we can see here that people were willing to kind of contact their council or contact their MP about trees. They would support funding trees. And they'd also join in events and campaigns as well, and maybe become a tree warden. So we can see there's a real interest from local residents about getting engaged with trees. So what we're doing, we've recently set up a community green forum, which is something I run on a quarterly basis. And that's bringing together community groups such as the tree wardens, Friends of the Earth, Climate Choir, Wildlife Trust volunteers. So it's bringing together those people with that shared interest so that we can find ways to collaborate and find ways to kind of amplify our activities and our messages as well. We're looking to later this year focus on a neighbourhood called Portsea in Portsmouth, which is sort of covers the dockyard area, the naval area, and also a lot of high density housing as well. And we have an ambition of planting 100 trees, again, to tie in with our centenary celebrations. So we're working with those stakeholders at like the MOD and the university to hopefully plant trees on their land as well as Portsmouth's land as well. But it's going to be a real kind of engagement programme. So we want to run some talks and walks to get people involved, get them learning about the trees and those kind of cultural and social connections as well. We're looking at tree pit adoption as well. So Portsmouth Friends of the Earth group are very keen on this, and we are looking to maybe run a scheme where people can kind of scatter wildflower seeds in a tree pit and look after it. We really don't want to be disturbing the trees, so we wouldn't be comfortable with people kind of digging to plant shrubs or bulbs or anything, but sowing annuals on the surface is something that we are looking at. And we're also looking at ways we can use citizen science to get people more engaged with trees. So potentially recording ancient and veteran trees. We don't have many currently on the map for Portsmouth. I think that is partly due to there not actually being many ancient or veteran trees in Portsmouth. But also I would like to explore whether it is because we haven't been out and recorded. So if we can get community engaged with that, that would be a really nice activity. So yeah, we've had lots of benefits from doing our social and cultural values survey. It's really feeding into the projects that we're designing and the direction that we're taking our resilient treescape work. And I've not kind of put it on these slides, but I kind of feel that by having 1,000 people answer this survey and having data from them, it's really helping to bolster our messages. So like as tree officers, we can really kind of say what we're trying to achieve and why, and it's kind of giving us that extra information as well. So I think it's been really valuable for us. Forest Research and Tree Council and others have produced a guide for other local authorities if you would like to do your own social and cultural values survey. It's a really handy guide, step-by-step process, and it gives you examples of lots of the questions that we used in our social and cultural values survey as well. You can find that on the Tree Council website as a downloadable document. So yeah, I think that is all from me. So real kind of whistle-stop tour of what we have done. And yeah, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Rachel. Great presentation, and lovely to see residents and local people being involved in planting schemes. Critical. And actually, there's a comment from Sue that got a round of applause and thumbs up and etc. on the chat site, saying, "I think that taking a planting for benefits approach is critical." And yeah, brilliant. I think that's one of the key messages from your presentation today. A question here for Rachel: are you also working with the planning officers to embed the tree planting into policy?
Yes, we are. Yeah, so I lead a resilient treescape group across the council. So that's kind of made up of colleagues from different directorates who all have trees as part of their roles. So we're really kind of helping to drive forward some of that kind of guidance and information that's going into policy. So Portsmouth City Council is currently updating its local plan. So we've had a look through that for all the tree related items, and we've made some changes in that over the last sort of few months as well. So hopefully as that plan progresses through, those changes will be adopted in there.
Thank you, Rachel. And another comment: it's great to see an interest from locals in tree wardening. Our Portsmouth and Southshire Tree Warden Network are a fantastic group of volunteers doing some truly impressive work across the city, not only planting trees, but also nurturing young trees in local tree nurseries and engaging the community through initiatives like working with local schools. So there you go. That's brilliant. I presume Treeconomics did the iTree report for you, looking at tree canopy cover, etc.
No, it was Forest Research. Forest
Research.
Eco for us. And then we worked with Treeconomics to do our urban forest master plan.
Okay.
So well, that both.
Yeah, that gives me a good opportunity to promote our latest book that I co-wrote with Kenton Rogers, called which should be in capitals, bold, The Tree Care Manual, which we've done in conjunction with the Arboretum Association, which came out last Wednesday and is on sale now at £30 through the Arboricultural Association, taking you through what is a tree, how a tree grows, tree selection, buying a tree from a nursery, tree planting, tree establishment, tree pruning, removal, troubleshooting, etc. And I think Sue put a link at the top of the chat page for me. So thank you, Sue, for doing that. Rachel, thank you for a lovely presentation. And again, another encouraging presentation to see that things, you know, if you do them properly and plan, they work, and you get a good result. So thank you very much, Rachel. So our next guest is Sharon Durdant-Hollamby, Director of Sharon Hosegood Associates, who's going to present a case study on achieving tree success in complex, dense urban environments. Sharon, over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Tony. I'm going to share my screen, and thank you everybody for inviting me. Here we go, here's the techie bit. Hopefully that's worked. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Excellent, lovely. So I work in private practice and I work within the development industry. And I'm going to discuss today a project I worked on for about 10 years and go back to at least once a year, because I think it's really important to understand the impact of what we do. So this project is called 351 Caledonian Road in Islington, London. And the developer was a joint venture with Telford Homes and London and Quadrant, a large element of social housing. And I worked with a really, really great team, a great architect, Jessica and Wiles, and Standerwitt Land Design, Henrietta Westergaard is the ecologist, and we still keep in touch. And it's a bit like that Radio 4 programme, The Reunion. We just feel like we went through something big together. So I'm going to share this with you. But before I do, not all of my projects are this successful. I wish they were. But this is one of the ones where I feel that working in the development industry as a chartered horticulturalist, you can have impact. I want to look at this through the lens of the 3-30-300 rule, because often we discuss this by Cecil Canynandike, this wonderful movement of those who don't know, everybody should be able to see 3 trees from their window, and there should be 30% canopy cover, and no one should be further away than 300 metres from the nearest green space. This movement is attracting such traction that it was actually a question on who wants to be a millionaire in Italy. So fantastic. So this is what the site looks like. It's in Islington, as I said earlier, and partly it's an old railway siding. And you can see on the left-hand side that there is a very, very steep slope going down to the boundary here. So that gives you an overgrown. A lot of this was bramble and Japanese knotweed, but I'll explain further. Imagine the challenge of this site as a developer. It's about 1.9 hectares of vacant land, and 63% of the site is a site of importance for nature conservation, grade 1. There are 2 small areas of woodland, which is a real scarcity in Islington, and there are tree preservation orders. The eastern part of the site is within a conservation area, but this heavy infestation of Japanese knotweed was actually degrading the sink and causing a real problem. There was also fly tipping. There was even a mattress. I mean, the ingenuity of people, I just don't know. But underneath, there was a river fleet culverted and the high-speed channel tunnel rail link 5 metres below. So I remember during the construction phase, the site manager had to put lots of sensors on the tunnel to make sure there were no vibrations from the piling above. It was quite the challenge. We've got high-density housing to the south and North London line to the north, so a really, really tricky site, but one full of opportunity. So there are 175 trees within the sink, including secondary woodland, and 15 trees outside the TPO. But the photograph there just shows the sort of condition of the site when I first started looking at it. So just going back, actually, this was stage 01, because I'm also looking at this through the rigour of the REBA work stages. So at stage 1, everybody was instructed and we were told to start working as a team collaboratively so that the layout was informed by the site constraints. So during the concept design, the vision was that we imagine the development as an urban oasis, an island of biodiversity in the most densely developed borough in the UK. It was very, very ambitious and based on a lot of surveying data from the whole team. And we had a really good working relationship with the planning department at Islington Council. Something that I really cherish with all programmes is to have that close working relationship with officers who quite rightly demand and expect a high standard based on national and local policies. And policies are so important for setting that framework. So we started imagining this scheme of floating pavilions in our oasis of existing landscape and new trees. The 2 woodlands are shown retained there, and they were retained, and the trees along the southern boundary and individual trees within the development as well, all set within a steep slope. and we had a lot of challenges, especially dealing with the Japanese knotweed. So as part of the stage 3, the planning application, I produced a detailed arboricultural impact assessment to the British standards, and that looked at what do we have at the moment, what can be retained realistically, what will need to be removed, and how are we going to look after what we're keeping. And that contains a series of plans and a tree surgery schedule. That's the essence of an arboricultural impact assessment. But again, what was good about that scheme is that the green infrastructure, the existing and the proposed, really was at the very heart of what we were trying to achieve here. So this plan here shows the tree removal plan. We have a big problem, and there still is a big problem on this site, with sooty bark disease, because there is a high population of sycamore on this site. And during the first survey, lots of sooty bark disease was evident. And with increasing hot summers, that triggers this sort of fungus, Cryptostroma corticale, to become quite prevalent. There were some trees that were just in a poor quality, but we tried to retain significant swathes of the green and the blue. The blue just simply indicates that it needs to be pruned. So we're left with this space here. We delivered 156 residential units, but that did result in an initial loss of 26% canopy cover, equating to 65 trees. Of those, nearly all were category C or category U, which means low value or unsuitable for retention. There was also a small commercial unit, and the scheme delivered 2,408 new trees and shrubs, of which 480 were semi-mature. And there is a 25-year management plan for the woodlands, secured by a Section 106 agreement and a path meandering through. And there was an educational nature trail with a bird hide for a local school. So there were all the intentions at the stage 3 submission. And here's a second plan, just shows the tree retention and how it will be retained during site with tree protection, fencing and details. So we did get planning permission, and for technical design, stage 4, this is a really challenging time for arboriculture. And I'm a great advocate of team coordination, because at this time, when we go into detailed technical design, people need to get together and really discuss their disparate, separated professional views. So if any arboriculturalists are here today, I strongly advocate having an arboricultural solutions meeting. I actually put this in my quote, and I make it a condition of me being instructed. And this 1-hour Teams meeting is chaired by me, and I go around the site, and it's quite amazing how many things pop up from the engineer or the construction team, all sorts of different things where you think you've got everything sorted out, and suddenly there's going to be drainage, and I speak generally, suddenly there's going to be a contamination that you weren't expecting, which requires technical work near trees. So highly recommend this. It also is quite fun, and it builds that team bonding, which was really at the core success of this project. And the other thing that really helped was a really detailed, robust set of planning conditions, which I analysed and set out how I was going to work within each condition and who I was going to work with. Arboricultural method statements must be bespoke and cannot be written except in very rare circumstances at stage 4. So this led to more detailed plans. Looking at the one in the top hand corner there is how we dealt with Japanese knotweed near trees. And it was a combination of me being on site. I remember standing there on a steep slope with diggers working nearby and thinking, right, how are we going to do this? So we hand dug the nodules out in tree roots, and other areas were stem injected, and the trees have been fine, and it's been a successful eradication. And in the bottom corner there, you can see an orange line. So we have to deal with this level change. So within the protected zones, shown by the black tree protection fencing, levels remain the same. But this is the most important part, really, is stage 5 and stage 6. What actually happens on site? Because if we don't actually get out and supervise it, everything that's been written down becomes a desktop exercise and in somebody's computer file. And on this site, I actually went 17 times. So we started off in 2015, and after the initial clearance, fairly standard photographs there of tree protection fencing, which was regularly inspected, and the bottom left-hand corner there is showing the piling going in. But another thing happens is when you keep going to site, you develop these strong relationships with the site managers and the team there, which means if there's a problem, they're going to give you a call. And so you're going to be seen as a problem solver, an enabler to making sure that everything can be delivered. And it becomes enjoyable. And importantly, I learn. These construction sites are my classroom. That's where I learned how we can effectively care for trees on site. The other thing that the client was very generous about was actually allowing me to take 2 separate school groups during a construction phase. I can't share photographs of the children, but we had about a year apart, we had 2 classrooms of children come along to learn about tree planting and actually plant some of the planned landscaping scheme within the woodland areas. But also they saw a bit about construction. There was a massive piling rig just behind us in that photograph. And it's just great fun for all the reasons that everybody on this call knows. And those trees have survived. We just planted whips, native whips. And in that photograph is John Ryan on the left-hand side. I had a quick chat with half an hour before this, and he's the tree officer who really supported it. And there's lots of team members there. Now, the success of this scheme is really down to the beautiful, sensitive, ecologically led landscape design by Standerwick Land Design, who really, in a similar way that I love what Jane was talking about, the framework of the native, forming most of the green infrastructure, but with the non-native ornamentals nearer to the buildings. And that was the approach here. But because it was a sink, it was really carefully collaborated with the ecological consultant and the local authority ecologist as well to create this cohesive scheme. And it included a meadow on the western side. This project went on to win many awards. And you can see more details on the link below. Another thing we thought about, I'm very mindful with new planting that on these sites, which are essentially re-landscaped with new soil, and I loved again what Jane said about reuse of soil, but on some sites, on these very tight spaces, there isn't the room to stockpile soil. So I'm often quite mindful of the fact that the soil might be compacted underneath. So we did some decompaction, and the new soil could probably benefit from what I call, forgive me, muck and magic. So looking at handover and use, here are some photographs recently. I'm going to skip that slide and show you the increase in canopy cover is way beyond what has been lost, and that we meet the 330 rule. And by the way, the architect, Alex Luria, is actually one of the participants today, so I'm sure he'd be able to answer any questions you have on the design. But this is how it was this summer, early summer, just walking through the woodland walk. And you can see here the images where we meet the 330-300 rule and the successful integration of new planting and existing, and various viewpoints here of this green oasis surrounding floating pavilions. And here is the CGI, and here's what it looks like. Thanks to Alex Lurie for that particular photograph. And here we are. When I went there this summer, it was full of the noise of children playing, and that to me is a great success. And you can see here the integration, getting trees close to building. Let's not be afraid of that. We need them for all the ecosystem services benefits we understand. So what went well? All the early data, detailed reporting, but it was for me the standout strong professional relationships. We actually have formed a bond. The brilliance of the robust planning conditions, so important, based on strong policies. Clear evidence of compliance and creativity, such as reuse of timber on site. I want to know, what is the next chapter in the green story of this site, and what can it teach us? What is a day in the life like for someone who lives there? I'm going to try and find out. And having spoken to John Ryan, he's confirmed that there has been an increase in the value of the sink, and that we are going to look at the implementation of the woodland management plan. So whatever you do, participants, let's see the trees and all the glorious technicolor of all the multiple benefits they provide socially and culturally, as well as environmentally. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. Another great presentation and very successful project as well. The last photograph you showed of the decking and the stairs going down and the growth from that planting. What was the space, the time space between planting and that last photograph?
It was about 7 years,
That's
5 to 7
amazing.
years. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's incredible. They're actually been planted really densely,
Yeah.
and so they have been really successful. The first year, though, after planting, half of them died,
Mhm.
and they had to be replaced because they had a really hot, dry summer. But
Yeah.
it's that second planting that has worked really, really well. But
Yeah.
I'm still interested, Tony, because I'm no longer instructed.
Mm.
How is the woodland doing?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so for that reason, I think it's important that we reflect upon schemes that we've been so involved with and
Yeah.
learn from them, good and bad, and some are bad.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And, you know, I think following up and going back and looking at trees that you've planted several years later shows your professional interest and confidence that it's going to be successful. You know, too many people plant trees, walk away from them, and are you know they're orphans from day one with neglect, and you've countered that. I love. I'd like to have been at that Arboricultural Solutions meeting with all the golden retrievers, Labradors, etc. I bet that was interesting.
Yeah.
And your 17 visits, I presume you were the arboricultural supervisor. And
Yes.
you know, often we write this into specification schedules, documents to comply with BS 5837, but you know, often it's not followed up, and it's written to get that project off the ground
Oh,
and then ignored. So congratulations and well done for
thank you.
following that up. The other thing I liked as well is, you know, the air spading that was being done to integrate the imported soil with the existing soil, and often we see on building sites, new homes, etc., that soil is just dumped on compacted soil that's waterlogged, never binds, and then we have anaerobic conditions that
Yes.
show later down the line. So, you know, brilliant. Really, I'm quite excited. I'm getting all excited. There's one question here. Did this scheme need to deliver biodiversity net gain targets to mitigate the loss of linear habitats?
No, it didn't, because it wasn't then invented, but it did
Okay, yeah.
achieve Code for Sustainable Homes level 5. And
Okay.
as part of the 25-year management plan, the improving ecology, and there is an improvement, is being measured.
Yeah, good. Yeah, arboricultural clerk of work, something I've always offered as an independent service from Gavin Callard. Totally agree. That's what we are sometimes, isn't it? And bringing builders together. I remember the last project I did at Kew. And we had almost every morning before everyone went onto the site, we did a toolbox talk, whether it was
Yes.
water voles, badgers. I mean, often to comply with Bryan, and to get points. But the engineers, the builders, the contractors, they loved it. You know, they started to look forward to those toolbox talks. So you know, that's great. Good. Well, thank you very much, Sharon. I'm sure there'll be more questions at the end. A great presentation. Thank you. So our last speaker today is Rory Wilson, Director of LDA Design, who's going to talk to us about a regeneration led by Landscape at Sighthill in Glasgow. Rory, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I'm just going to endeavour to share here. So if you could let me know when it's sharing.
Yeah, I'll stay on until we see it.
Let's see. Is that sharing now?
Not yet.
Oh.
Yeah, we're coming. Yeah, we're there.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here today. Sighthill is a project that is dear to the studio's heart. We've been working on it for 13 years now. And it was the first project we actually picked up when we opened the studio in Glasgow. So we've seen it through its life cycle, if you like. And it's probably the first project where we've had the opportunity to really apply that landscape-led approach to a project. So just a little bit about us to start with. LDA Design was established in 1979, and we've been employee-owned since 2021. We have a number of studios, 9 in total, the length and breadth of the UK, from Exeter in the south to the outpost in the north in Glasgow, where I'm based. And we're a team of 220 at the moment. And we specialise in landscape architecture, urban design, master planning, and environmental planning. So at the outset of every project, we like to embed positive impacts, be they social, environmental, and economic. So we follow this outcomes-based approach where we really seek to bring value to every project we work on and make sure that we can test ourselves against those positive outcomes throughout the duration and delivery of a project. We quite often start by asking a question, and we ask this of the client, key stakeholders, and the communities. And that is, what's the change that you would like to see? What are the possible positive outcomes that we can deliver through our project work? And this question really allows us to embed those positive outcomes into our project work, allows us to discover and define, develop and deliver those positive outcomes. And as I said, test ourselves at key stages throughout the duration of the project and beyond to make sure that we are delivering those positive outcomes. So without further ado, moving on to Sighthill itself. Sighthill is located north of Glasgow city centre. It's only really a 7-minute walk from the centre of Glasgow down to George Square, for those who know Glasgow. But it has suffered in the past from social, economic and environmental deprivation. It is bounded on the east by the Springburn Road, on the west side by the Glasgow and Edinburgh railway line, and to the south by the major piece of infrastructure, the M8 motorway. So whilst it's located quite close to the city centre, it sat within a pocket of isolation and suffered from that social, economic and environmental deprivation for a number of years. However, in about around 2010, 2012, Glasgow City Council bid for the Youth Olympics, and the intention was that Sighthill would be redeveloped, if successful, as the main residential area for the Youth Olympics and ultimately permanent homes following that. Regrettably, Glasgow didn't pick up the Youth Olympics, but there was a commitment made at that stage for the regeneration of Sighthill. Following that commitment, there was a number of stages that the project had to go through, And one of the key challenges of the site, it kind of suffered from the Victorian industrial era, if you like, and there was a lot of chemical works, etc., on the site, so it required whole-scale remediation. There was a sulphurous soup that sat underneath the ground called Glasgow, which required to be either removed or capped, which required extensive site works across the site, a lot of muck shifting, etc. But this also invited the opportunity for the advanced infrastructure to be brought forward before the houses. And we worked on the delivery of the advanced infrastructure for about 8 years. And that encompassed around 30 hectares of new parkland and public realm spaces across the site. And now we're actively involved in the delivery of the residential component to the site, which you can see in the final image there. So the intention is that there will be about 1,000 plus homes delivered over the next 10 years in Sighthill, and the existing community will be retained within the site too. So the master plan itself is the biggest regeneration project of its kind outside London. And as I said, we're looking to deliver approximately 1,000 homes, which are tenure blind, across the site. The proposals also deliver, which have been delivered as part of the advanced infrastructure actually, a new community campus, combining 2 schools which previously existed on the site, a new church. There is a smart integrated sod system which allows for 3 levels of treatment of all water runoff across the site before it enters the Forth and Clyde Canal. And then one of the key components of the proposals was reconnecting Sighthill to the city by a new active travel route corridor that runs through the site and crosses the M8 in an iconic bridge structure. The landscape first approach really allowed us to actually have fun in the redesign of Sighthill, but also engage with the existing community there. So we borrowed upon lasting memories of the existing residents in Sighthill as part of the engagement at the outset of the project, where we really engaged with them to understand what was important for them about Sighthill, what was important to be retained. Some of the things that they mentioned were Jack's Mountain, which was a spoil heap on the site. And we also had like the suds ponds. There was a sulphurous pond that people used to play on site. So we wanted to keep these component parts, but maybe make them a bit more appropriate and less environmentally challenging moving forward, but they were embedded within the design proposals themselves. The outcomes that we developed in collaboration with the existing community up there were the creation of like a coherent landscape structure throughout the site. Those opportunities for social interaction embedded within the proposals, because we were keen that the existing community held on to that sense of place, but we created those opportunities for social cohesion, particularly when there's about 3,500 to 4,000 new residents planned for Sighthill. So how could we bring the existing and new community together? That was really important. Enhancing the biodiversity across the site. There was a monoculture of tree species really on the old Sighthill site, ash and sycamore primarily. So we wanted to embed as much biodiversity within the new proposals moving forward as possible. And then create that sense of place, of course. So this is where we started. Sighthill, you can see the amount of muck shifting that was required in terms of that remediation. This is looking south towards the city centre, so you can see how close it is located to the city centre. Another one looking north towards the cemetery. And the works also required extensive new services to be brought in and upgrades to sewer systems, etc., that had failed since the Victorian era. So it wasn't without its challenges. Where possible, primarily towards the periphery of the site, we looked to retain trees. So we worked hand in hand with the engineers to come up with a number of strategies, particularly around levels, how we could feather in and integrate groups of trees to make sure they were retained, to give that sense of maturity from day one and buffer to the railway line, etc. In all, 30 hectares of the overall 48 hectare site was given over to either green and blue infrastructure or new public realm. We planted over 4,000 new mature and semi-mature trees of different species across the site. And of course, we considered bioresilience as part of that. The landscape character of Sighthill is split up into two distinctive areas. We've got the landscape park, which is more about management of the landscape rather than maintenance. And then we've got the garden spine, which runs through the main residential areas, which requires a higher degree of maintenance and is much more floriferous and fun in its outlook. Here are some of the pictures of the planting. This is probably a year or two after the works were completed, and you can see the trees and the wildflower meadows, etc., really beginning to establish within these photos. Maintenance was a key consideration because it was for a local authority ultimately. So we have lots of areas of wildflower plantings and low mow regimes required. So rather than 30 cuts a year, we're down to about 5 cuts. And here's some more of the kind of ornamental planting within those key areas within the plan. And the vision to reality, we were keen to hold ourselves accountable to those outcomes. So one of the key things was creating the connection back to Springburn, which is to the east, and the city to the south. So there's an image of that key connection along the boulevard, really embedding the Sighthill within its surrounding and creating that key gateway to the existing communities to the east. And again, along the boulevard, these are some very, very early renders that we produced. The boulevard runs through the centre of the site, if you like. And these are the actual delivery. So you can see the trees there. And either side of the street, the next phase of housing is about to commence. And then we had a number of parkettes, these moments for people to socially engage with each other, a series of parklets on the main journey to the community campus, which sits at the heart of the proposals. And then again, Civic Boulevard West towards the city centre, some early visualisations and the reality. And this is the phase 1 delivery of the housing. And you can see the trees there are beginning to really establish themselves. And then this is the bridge landing, the connection to the city centre to the south, the main arrival point from the city to Sighthill. And you can see that's phase 1 again of the housing, and the woodland blocks that have been planted to the periphery and along the M8 motorway. And here are some aerial views and photos of the main active travel corridor, which extends through the site and brings that green across the motorway, creating that active travel route. And it is probably the most popular route. So rather than people taking the car to the city centre and having to cross the challenging M8 or join the M8, the main primary mode of transport across the site now is actually over the new active travel bridge, which connects the city centre to Sighthill. Bioresilience was a key consideration in the proposals too. So historically, when I started my career, an avenue of trees had to be a single species, but we took a different approach in Sighthill, where we planted a number of species of a similar form along the main boulevard. So this is the Civic Boulevard West with the community campus off it. The main area of shops, etc., sit along here too. We planted a number of species, all fastigiate in character. So the avenue looks like a single entity, if you like, but encompasses a number of species. And this was to build in bioresilience in case any horrible beasties or diseases came along. And of course they did. So not long after the trees were planted along the boulevard, oak processionary moth was discovered. So a number of oaks had to come out and be replaced, but it was relatively localized, thankfully. And it meant that the remainder of the boulevard and its planting remained in place, and those trees that were affected were replaced with another species. And then just a little eye on the detail, there was a number of planting methods for trees. So where possible, we planted in engineered soils, but within the main areas of hard landscaping, we utilized tree cells. And we went over and above the recommendation in terms of size. And we also joined up tree cells wherever possible to create the biggest root run possible, just to ensure the longevity of those trees. Sustainability also extended to the hard materials that we used on site. So approximately 60% of all stone across Sighthill is indigenous to Scotland, and the whinstone in particular comes about 20 miles down the road, and we managed to reinvigorate the natural stone industry within Scotland through our work in Sighthill and placing that order. And now whinstone can be found in London again, and it's very popular within projects. So as well as the green infrastructure across the site, blue infrastructure was embedded. Sighthill historically had suffered from flooding. So in order the development to go forward, there was a smart suds system introduced to Sighthill, where it ends up in the Forth and Clyde Canal. But additional capacity can be introduced to the system by dropping the level of the canal in periods of high precipitation, ensuring that the historic flooding in Sighthill is alleviated. Within the park itself, it's a very naturalistic system of suds and ponds retention. And then within the more urban areas of the plan, it takes a more urban form, creating that kind of variance and vibrancy across the site again. And then at the end of the project, we were keen to hand it over to create that sense of ownership. So we invited a number of school children from the community campus, those two schools combined, on a walk where we handed the park over to them, introducing them all those areas and the kind of history and legacy of Sighthill, creating that sense of ownership and adoption by the local school children. And they've actually become the park ambassadors now for Sighthill, and they are taking care of making sure our defects lists are all up to speed, and we pass them on to the council now. So it's really about creating that lasting legacy and that sense of ownership. And I think I will leave it there, if that's okay. Let me see. Oh, I can't see anybody.
Yeah, Rory, thank you. Brilliant. That's, I love it. When I often go up to the west coast of Scotland looking at gardens, you know, Benmore, those places, and drive along that M8. I must drive past it. So the next time I go up there, then I'll be dropping in to have a look, because it looks amazing. And so the photographs that you showed of the boulevard trees, how long was that photograph taken after planting?
That was probably within one winter and into the next summer. Brilliant. So they're really beginning to establish, which is great. We probably could count on, apart from the oak processionary moth, we could count the losses on two hands across the site. So it's been pretty special. But we did, as part of the proposals, allow for a 5-year management and maintenance program by external contractors, because we wanted to hand it over to the council established. Yeah, I think that was a lesson to be learned in the boulevard. The importance of diversity in an avenue planting. You know, rather than a monotypic avenue, one species. Had they all been oak, the whole lot would have had to go. But breaking it up with different species, you overcame that. So the importance of biodiversity, and having those, I've written down here fire breaks along that, so that you compartmentalized any diseases, pests, etc. that were being introduced. So you know, really good. We've got a couple of questions. I have time for a couple of questions for you, Rory. One of them is, with the local authority taking on maintenance, did you specifically look for low maintenance options for the garden spine, which sounds like the most maintenance heavy element of the project? Absolutely, we did. We worked really closely with Glasgow City Council to make sure that they were satisfied with the species that we were proposing, particularly the ground covers and things like that, and really robust selection of planting too, because, you know, people desire lines evolve over time and people walk over things. So we wanted to make sure that that was a key consideration as part of the kind of selection.
Yeah. Can you explain a bit more about the smart element in the SUD scheme?
I'll try to. It still goes a wee bit over my head, but the canal has the SUDs across the site take all the kind of the surface water, and it's been scaled for the ultimate delivery of the site. So the capacity of the canal, sorry, the SUD features at the moment is probably over what's required at the moment. But there are stop valves within the system that allow, once the SUDs are full, to drain into the Forth and Clyde Canal. But there's sensors within the canal itself that can lower the level of the canal by up to 10 centimetres, I think, creating an additional stormwater capacity within the canal. So as part of the North Glasgow strategic water management system, and Sighthill was the first bit of that to be delivered as part of those proposals. So it took a marriage between the management of the canal and Glasgow City Council to come to that agreement. But it's great to see.
Good. A question here from Helen McHolland. I believe that the Stockholm system was used for some of the street trees. How are the trees performing in comparison to those in cells?
To be honest, I think the Stockholm system has held back the trees a little bit. It wasn't a scientific endeavour. I'll start with that. But we tried to retain as much material on site as possible. So we had a lot of redundant rocks, etc. So we decided to do a couple of pits with the Stockholm system, and the girth of the trees aren't quite as large as the trees adjacent to them, which have been planted in that engineered soil in the open ground, if you like.
Yeah, very interesting. Now, and a question here from Jodie Robertson, which is of interest to me as well. Did oak procession moth arrive on the new trees, or were they discovered in the area?
On the new trees, unfortunately. Even with all our certification and everything, it was on the new trees.
And were they, I mean, this you don't have to answer this, but were the trees from a plant healthy nursery? Were they from a nursery, a UK nursery, or imported?
They were imported. They were imported. We couldn't get the oak at the time anywhere else, and they were. So it was an unfortunate discovery, but thankfully we did discover it before it spread.
Yeah. And I suppose that's why we like trees to be on if imported trees going through a nursery system, like a quarantine for, I think it's a minimum of 6 months to so that if anything like this does appear, then we can treat it in the nursery before it gets into the landscape. Luckily, you saw it early and you dealt with it. So thank you for that. Picking up on the Stockholm system, is it a time issue? I.e., for example, do the trees take longer but get there eventually, or perhaps all these systems are still at an early stage in the long life of trees?
Perhaps. I'm not quite sure, but those trees that we're talking about, I think were planted about 5 years ago. So we're doing a comparison over 5 years. So even though it's a longer route, I quite often walk via Sighthill on the way home from work.
To see what they're doing.
I call upon them quite frequently, so provide updates.
They're lucky they've got a project manager like yourself, actually, that has a personal interest, and you're the foster parent for all these trees. And I think it's important that we get this information. You know, I mean, many sites they're completed, and then we walk away from them, and we never really find out that how things respond longer term. So, you know, congratulations.
I have been told off removing epicormic growth off some of the trees along the avenue by the developer, thinking I'm vandalizing the trees. So the secretaries are quite often in my back pocket.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Rory. Another great presentation to round off today's speakers. There may be some more questions come up, but thank you for a great talk and another really exciting, positive project of success. So, thank you for that. I'm going to go to Sue and see if there's any. I've got the chat line here, Sue. Is there anything that I've missed that's key?
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I'm just dashing through all the questions, starting
I
at the
know.
beginning.
This is a
There's
really good thing about these webinars that, it does generate interest and
yeah,
some really good questions.
there's an awful lot about stewardship. I think the thing that really exercises everybody is stewardship, cost of stewardship, demonstrating perhaps it's not as expensive as the assumptions are about it. So it was interesting with Jane, if she's there, the speakers all here, the
Yes,
sort
I
of
think so.
mechanisms where you can manage long-term stewardship versus,
Yeah,
I don't know, leaving it alone, and how costly actually is that stewardship, I think is something that would be really good to bottom out.
it would. Well, Rory's sort of answered a bit of that, hasn't he? But that's personal. Showing ownership of a scheme, even though he's finished and it's a longer walk home. So that's really good that people like Rory are doing that. But have any of the other speakers, Sharon? I'm sure you've been to. I'm sure you've been to your site to see how it's faring, and what's the stewardship like of that scheme now?
That's a really important question. So yes, I do go because of professional interest, and I do try and go back to many of my sites because, not quite answering your question, but it's not just to see how the newly planted trees are growing, but it's how the retained trees, are they thriving? Were the pressures on them too great?
Yeah.
And what could we do to learn from that? In terms of this particular site, so once the site was complete, it was handed over to the Housing Association, and I'm not appointed by them. But
No.
having spoken to John Ryan, who's the head of all things green at Islington Council earlier today, he said he was very honest, and he said there has been a resourcing problem in that local authority, which is now being partially resolved. And the importance of stating that is when we have things that have been designed and planted and managed by planning condition, we need to have funding to resource a local authority to ensure compliance, especially with something like a site of importance to nature conservation. To say there has been some measuring. So in terms of my role as an arboricultural associate, if I say associate and consultant, sorry, we don't get involved once it's built, but what we do try and do is ensure that large trees are retained in the public realm and not in people's gardens where we can. So the stewardship of a development site is holistic. There is one management regime for the retained and the new landscape, which ensures some continuity. But it's a major problem.
Yeah.
So
Thank you,
long
Sharon.
answer.
Yeah. Jane, what about your site, Derwentthorpe Garden Village? What's the stewardship like there?
Oh, well, it's been very good, to be honest, Tony. Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust are really good. They're a really good client. They want to do the right thing. So we're very, very lucky to have had them as our client because they just took on board a lot of the things that we were suggesting to them because they want to do the right thing, and they're not taking a short-term view because some of the properties are sold, some of them are part rental, some of them are fully rental, and then you've got the full range from affordable right through to really quite big houses. So there's a real mixed community. They like to make sure that the community is really cohesive. So they involve the community, they have community groups, and they do regular surveys with the community to see how things are faring. So they do take the long-term view. So we're very fortunate with that, and we have clients that don't. Once our commission's finished, they don't want you back, and there are times when we sneak back and go and have a look. But I think on the whole, most of our clients are really interested and concerned that they do leave a legacy, albeit in not all perfect, but they do want to leave a decent legacy, and they're spending a lot of money, and they want to see good come from that.
Yeah.
I think just going back one stage, I think one of the most important things is when we have our contractors on site and we have the maintenance and defects period, is we try and have it as long as we can. So in my practice, we try and do 3 to 5 years maintenance defects period before it's handed over to the client, whether it's Joseph Rowntree or whoever it might be, to make sure that those plants are properly established and are thriving before we actually hand them over. We do resist it when some of our clients think they're saving money by not allowing or taking the maintenance off the landscape contractor. So then there's no real incentive to do a good job in the first instance. I just wanted to make that point because I think it's really important.
I really like.
Sorry. Oh, sorry, Sue.
No, I was just going to say I really like the idea of the school children being the ambassadors and keeping defaults up. I think perhaps we should make sure all sites have school children, making sure that defaults are kept up to speed, because they're the next generation who are going to want to look after them.
Should be in the national curriculum.
Absolutely. Oh, we're trying. We're doing our best with that, but definitely. Have you got another one, or do you want me to give?
Well, I was just going to follow on actually, and ask Jen how is the stewardship paid for at Derwentthorpe, and is there a green infrastructure charge for the residents?
I can't remember the details of it, Tony, but I think there is a small charge. I don't think it's astronomical. I know there's 1 or 2 sites I've been working on recently where people have actually been quite horrified as the prices have gone up, having to pay for their green open space when the people who live in areas where the green open space is managed by the local authority don't pay anything extra other than their rates. But I can't remember what it is. So I wouldn't like to have a guess.
No, thank you. Sue, is there any other questions?
There's quite a lot of interest around trees and shading.
Yeah, I know. Well, that was from planting when Sharon showed the tree of the picture of the birch planted up against the building, which I thought was great. Actually, I think we're all too terrified to do that because of the threats of subsidence and heat, etc. But
so we're working with the RIBA because we think architects need to get to grips with that, and so we're doing various CPD sessions with them. But also a colleague of mine who's an urban climate expert, and Emma will know her, is doing something with the RIBA on trees and shading, because we're also, of course, with these hot summers, very exercised about urban heat island. So something perhaps we need to be better informing people of these sort of importance of, it's not just that they taking light away. And also I'm quite interested in housing built with mature trees. So the trees were there shading everything when the houses were built. Did nobody think of that, if that was going to be a problem? So I think we've got quite a lot sort of in that area.
Yeah, I think the sad thing is in the USA, they value trees close to buildings. Many parts of the USA, they have hotter summers and colder winters, and then trees, it's that additional benefit of reduced heating costs in winter for shade, protection from wind, and then and reduced air conditioning bills in summer, because they share that trees plant when they plant the right tree in the right place on the right side of the building, etc. And it's a shame. I mean, in the US, they really value that, and trees increase property values. But unfortunately, we're quite shy of that over here. We seem to be very frightened of insurance and etc.
Yeah, and Gavin Callard's made a good point. Birch or some of these smaller leaf trees actually give lovely dappled effects. I mean, I've got one here, and it's just a great pleasure. So it's a bit the choice of tree. Yes, a very heavy big leaf tree might be a bit oppressive, but then a question from Anthony Mills: do UK tree nurseries have the capacity to meet the demand? And the thing is that no, because imports are cheaper. How do we change that around?
I know. I think, do you know what? I think there's a webinar on tree procurement due, actually, Sue. I think that would be a really good one. And, I support UK nurseries. I buy all my trees through UK nurseries, and plant and UK nurseries that are plant healthy. Because I would hate to be the one that introduces Xylella or pine processionary moth, etc. So I think there's a webinar there and involve the nursery industry. But I do think we should be supporting them more. And I know there is a cost element, but we should be building that into planting schemes, etc.
Am I right in understanding that some continental nurseries actually get government support, so that's why they can do some of this longer term growing to produce all these
I'm sure that's the
mature
case.
trees?
Yeah, I'm sure that's the case. I'm not sure it's cheaper to import trees now neither. I think with all the restrictions from a new compliance with DEFRA and Fira, AFA, etc., and bringing trees into the country, the inspection regimes, etc., can be quite challenging and costly. So that may be something that, and I'm not averse to importing trees, but I do believe they should be coming onto a nursery, a UK nursery, and grown on where they're inspected and checked by DEFRA, AFA, etc.
So there's some very good comments in the chat. I will take all the chat and try and make it into something sensible with the references.
Yeah.
There aren't any more that I found specific questions, unless anybody quickly wants to put their hand up and ask one urgently.
The other thing, some really useful links that have been coming through for various websites, documents, British standards, Stockholm, the planting beds in the city of Stockholm, etc. The 330-300 rule. It's amazing. It's amazing what comes through here. So I think capturing those would be really useful. And good. Well, I think we can start to wrap up, Sue. I just want to thank all four speakers for brilliant talks that have been that are inspiring. And we all tend to look at the negative of projects and tree establishment, but we should, as we've done today, take more comfort from positive, successful projects and schemes. So thank you to our four speakers for bringing those to our attention. And thank you to the four speakers for being good and making my job easy. Sharon, you all kept to time. Brilliant. Everything worked. So thank you. And thank you to TDAG, Sue, Emma, Dee, the team for putting these wonderful webinars on. Thank you.
So I'll thank you, Tony, for doing excellent sharing as you ever do.
Thank you.
The presentations, the recording, the chat will all be on the website shortly, along with our newsletter for February. Our next seminars, it's going to be a sort of two-part series. On the 11th of March, we're going to talk about designing with trees. And part one is going to look at above ground ambitions. But on the 22nd of May, we're going to have the other part of that, which is taking account of below ground challenges, which can, of course, influence above ground ambitions. So that will be then. Future Build, you'll all have gathered, has changed from March to May, but we still have our two sessions on the 12th and on the 13th and 14th of May. And Tony and Kenton are going to give a tree walk in the local area on the 12th. And also, we hope have copies of their books, which they'll sign for anybody. So if you don't get it from the AA, you can get it there. If you go to Future Build, all free to register for. And all our upcoming events and our past events are all on the website. Just on the top line, go to events or past events. I only say this because everybody immediately asks me where they can find them. So that's where they all are. And otherwise, I think it's nice that we're all going to have our cup of tea a little bit earlier. Emma, have you got anything that I've missed out?
No, I don't think so. I think Sue and I and Dee will hang around for a couple of minutes after the formal end of the meeting in case anybody wants to suggest a new seminar or tell us any AOB, but didn't want to put their hand up in front of everybody else. So, but no, I think we can close the meeting if you're happy to do so, Sue.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
See you next